Hello, and wow, that's really something, Lex. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's comic book month, and this week we are talking the 2006 film Superman Returns. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my mild-mannered, unassuming co-host, Andrew Williams. Okay. You ready for this one, Andrew?
I am. Always excited to talk about Superman. As we mentioned last week, this was one we kind of passed over the first time, but we figured there was enough here to talk about to come back around. And this is a movie that I have a pretty firm history with that I'm excited to look back on, and I was excited to revisit it and see if any of those fond memories held up. But yeah, should be a heck of a thing.
We've talked about Superman maybe more than any other character on this podcast. I mean, we've done a lot of Batman too, I guess, but Superman 3, Superman 4, Man of Steel, Justice League, obviously. Now we're doing Superman Returns. So you've got a chance to talk a lot about Superman, and he's your guy, right? That Superman is your number one, right?
Yep.
What is your history with this movie? I've got to imagine you saw it in theaters.
I did. This would have been summer of 06, so this would have been after my first year of college. So I'm absolutely certain I went and saw it in the theaters, probably with my dad. Maybe, I don't remember. I know I saw it in theaters. I just don't remember those exact circumstances. I remember buying it on DVD when it came out. I remember, like, when I was in my first year at college, I had my TV set up in my dorm room, and there was pretty much always something playing on that TV at all times. I kind of, like, always had something on, even if it was just noise. And this was a movie that I would do that a lot with. It would just be in the player, and it would come up, and I'd hit play, and I'd be doing my thing, and then it would end, and I'd just hit play again. Like, it just cycled. It was the thing that I did a lot. So this movie cycled through my head a lot when I was that age. I know my dad really liked it too, because there's some fun cameos here from things that he remembers. And so this movie was a pretty big mainstay for the first couple of years I was at college. And then I kind of haven't really looked back at it in a long time for a variety of reasons, some of which we'll talk about. But it was, yeah, at a certain point, I can't deny that I was just stoked to have another Superman movie because, I mean, 2006 is almost 20 years removed from Superman 4, which came out the year I was born. So in my life, there had never been a Superman movie. There had been Superman stuff, like obviously like Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman was a show on TV. Obviously Smallville at this point was well into its existence. So Superman was definitely out there, but I was excited to see a new Superman movie and was hopeful at, the idea. This is 2006. The idea of a shared universe is not really on anyone's mind, but I always held out hope.
So I think I have a decent idea of what you think about the movie as it stands in the year 2023, just from our conversations that we have in our everyday life, Andrew. But you're telling me, like, you saw it in theaters, you had the DVD, you had it on repeat. Were you pretty into this? Was this, like, up there with the Donner films at one point for you?
I don't know if I'd say it's as far as the Donner films, and I don't want to go as far as to say, like, I like Stockholm myself, where it was like, oh, it's the new Superman movie. I have to love it because it's the new Superman movie. And, like, but I think that was definitely part of it, just having, like, a genuine, like, seemingly relatively prestige take on Superman. I mean, this was the guy who directed the X-Men flicks, the guys who wrote them. This was the same formula as the Donner movies, with relative unknown as Superman, surrounded by a cast of pretty well-known actors in every other role. And I think when it came out, I was just really vibing with the idea that vibing. Oh
You
no.
definitely didn't say that in 2006. I can promise you that.
No, I absolutely did not. But I think I was definitely like I said, I can't pretend the movie wasn't in a heavy rotation, and whether that was a genuine enjoyment. I mean, it had to be on some level. It can't not be. But or if it was just being stoked there was a new Superman movie, all of the above. I don't know, but like I said, at a certain point, you kind of fell out with it. The legacy of this movie, even just as a movie, like moving past some of the controversies about it, it didn't linger in people's minds for too long.
At
And I
all.
think
It really,
it, yeah,
like, you ask the average person about Superman, they go from Christopher Reeve to Henry Cavill. Like, with, like, there's that era and that era. And
yeah.
then you remind them, well, remember that one they did in the early 2000s? Like, oh, yeah, maybe vaguely. That was weird. But anyway, it's just kind of been erased almost. I saw this movie, I think I saw it in theaters. I saw it once in my life before doing it for this podcast. And I think it was in theaters. And I wasn't really a Superman guy. I wasn't hyped for it or anything, but, superhero movie, definitely into them. I remember the marketing. I remember this being very heavily marketed. I remember the shot of the bullet hitting his eyeball in like
Yep.
every trailer. But I remember seeing it and thinking, and look, hashtag PP is just what I thought in the early 2000s. That was kind of boring. That was my big takeaway. That was kind of boring. And I think, if anything, that became this movie's legacy.
I think absolutely. I was trying not to put it as bluntly as that when I was talking.
Look,
about
we're gonna talk about the positives, but let's be real about its reception.
The lasting legacy of this movie is that it's boring. That there is a particular story being told that is just not very engaging. It's a movie with Superman, where Superman feels like one of the least important characters in it.
Hashtag PP.
It's we're just kind of getting. I'm talking. This is like the legacy of the film.
Sure.
Like, basically, it's a boring movie that doesn't seem particularly interested in telling a story about Superman. We've got this other plot line going on with Lois and kind of everybody having moved on. We've got this time jump from a movie that we haven't seen, where we're 5 years after Superman's left the planet. People just really, I don't think, didn't land for it. And part of that might be that they never followed up on it. There was a lot of talk about a sequel to this that was gonna be they were talking more action-packed, like Brainiac, General Zod were names that were name-dropped. And I think there was some hope that maybe the sequel would the ends would justify the means in a little bit of the way, where it's like, okay, we got our setup movie where we got all that out of the way. Now we can kind of just move forward and get our stuff done. And but yeah, if there's a word that is this movie's lasting legacy, boring is probably it. It's that it's a really long movie as well. It's 2.5 hours.
It is long. No one can take that away from it. It's a long movie.
And Superman never fights anyone. That was the other big criticism I remember people saying at the time, is he doesn't throw a single punch this whole movie. Which, that's whatever. I don't really care. Like, if your criticism of Superman is that he didn't fight enough people, like, okay. But, like, that in itself isn't the problem. Because, like, I don't think he punches anybody in Superman the movie either. But yeah, needless to say, the lasting legacy was not kind. Not necessarily, like, I don't know, harsh, but people just moved on from it pretty quick. And it's not something that has gotten any kind of level of reevaluation outside, save maybe for, like, people saying, hey, Brandon Routh kind of deserved better than this, which, what a pattern among Superman actors.
All right, let's set the stage a little bit. Throw it back. The movie was released June 28th, 2006. Made on a budget of $223 million. That is a huge budget. It's a huge budget today, but very big for 2006. At the box office, it only brings in $391 million.
Which is not great.
Not great. Not with a budget like that, you hope for a little bit more.
So one thing I do want to point out is I have no idea if this is ultimately true or not, but I've heard that budget figure includes all money spent on previous Superman films to this point, which would basically be like any attempt at Superman since Superman 4. That would include like the money Tim Burton spent on Superman Lives. I don't know if that's actually true. If it is, it explains a little bit why this movie was so expensive, because they were redoing all the lost costs to that point. I don't know if that's how that works. I have no idea if that's true. So you're either looking at a movie that was facing an uphill battle by having to absorb all the previous costs of Superman movies, or you're just looking at a movie that's facing an uphill battle because it was so expensive.
Critically, it's actually pretty well received. Today it holds a 74% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. That's not just positive, but that's like pretty dang good.
I mean, that's 3 out of 4 critics. That's 3 out of 4 critics enjoyed it. That's pretty high, which may have some of you asking, why are we talking about it?
Well, didn't make a lot of money, and we kind of talked about the movie's legacy as it stands. And I wanted to look at Roger Ebert's review specifically. I mean, he's Roger Ebert, but I just knew that he loved the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, the first 2 in particular. But like Superman 1 is like one of his favorite movies. He's good friends with Christopher Reeve. Like he held those movies in very high regard. And this movie, we talk a little bit more about it, but it was, I don't know, marketing was kind of strange as far as where it falls in Superman canon. Is it a sequel to those movies, a spiritual successor? There's a lot of overlap, very strange, but it obviously wanted to tie itself to the legacy of those films and kind of recapture that feeling. And I was curious if it worked for Roger Ebert. It did not. He gave it a 2 out of 4 stars, which is the middle of the road star ranking, but you read the actual review and he doesn't really have a single nice thing to say about it. He spends most of the time comparing this movie to Superman the movie, which is an uphill battle for any movie, but this movie is kind of asking for those comparisons.
It is.
By casting someone that looks like Christopher Reeve, and like I said, with the sort of marketing behind it, kind of inviting those comparisons and that through line.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting thing to look back at his review, because if you asked me blind what Roger Ebert thought about this, I think I would say absolutely that he didn't like it. Because of the fact that we're going to talk about the positives, I swear. But just that was another one of the criticisms kind of aimed at the movie, was that people were like, what is this? Is this a sequel to Superman 2? Is it its own thing? And that became another point of confusion where people didn't really know, because if it's a sequel to Superman 2, there's still some questions that need to be answered. If it's its own thing, some questions that need to be answered. It was a movie that kind of dropped you in the middle of a story that, no matter what scenario it was, kind of left the audience out on their own. And it was a little strange, and that became another sticking point for a lot of people, was this idea that, like, is it a sequel or not? And regardless of whether or not it is, which I would say that it definitely feels like it's trying to be, you've got a movie that is absolutely drawing those lines. It has cast someone that looks like Christopher Reeve. We are using a lot of aesthetics from the Christopher Reeve films, the Crystals, the Fortress of Solitude. They use some archival footage of Marlon Brando as Jor-El. We've got a woman as Martha Kent that's very similar to the Martha Kent from those films. Like, you're drawing all these lines, casting someone that looks like Christopher Reeve, doing all of these things. You can't expect people to not make that connection regardless, which is why I think they leaned into it originally. And then it kind of felt like as we got closer to release, they kind of backed off and were kind of like, well, we're definitely paying homage, but it's kind of its own thing. And that led to, I think, what they say on Wikipedia, it's an homage
sequel. I've never heard that phrase before.
Or as I put it last week, it feels like it's trying to be a legacy sequel with like no returning cast member. Like, it's trying to be a late stage follow-up to a film that came out 25 plus years previous with nobody from that movie in it. And this is all immaterial at the end of the day, and it can be seen as really being pedantic, and it is. But it's all stuff that I don't think really helped the movie at the end of the day. You were kind of asking audiences to just kind of go in and not see all of the clear illusions. And then they did, and they were kind of like, well, this is a little weird. And like, as evidence, like, the critic score on this is 74%. This is literally certified fresh by Rotten Tomatoes standards. But the audience score does dip down significantly to 61%. Not a huge gulf, not as much as, say, like last week, but it drops down to almost in the rotten range, where the audience is still leaning towards positive, but you could say that's much more split. And the general comic book fan response, since then, it may have softened just because of some of the stuff with Superman we've gotten since then. And like I said, I know people really like Brandon Routh. They think he kind of got a raw deal here and didn't really get a chance to show what he was capable of, which I think is fair, because you're kind of, in this movie, he's kind of just doing the Christopher Reeve thing. You never really kind of get to see what he can do. Either way, all of this plays a factor, I think, in why this movie ended up being so confusing for people. And in the case of Roger Ebert, I can absolutely see why he'd be like, this movie's really trying to be Richard Donner's Superman, and it's just not getting there. Like I said, it's a weird thing to look back on. Like, just from its existence to what it is to how it's functioning as a movie, like, all of it is just so strange.
I always think it's weird when a movie, we just kind of established this movie isn't really a sequel to Superman 2, but they kind of worded it that way. Like, I'm reminded of, like, the Halloween franchise, where you've got, I don't know,
6
2 sequels
now
to the first one, 2 sequels to the second one, branching timelines. And, like, when 2018 Halloween is coming out, okay, it's a sequel to the very first one, ignoring all the other ones. But how do we know that, Andrew? We know that because of, like, interviews. And It's not, like, the trailers don't tell you. You just have to, like, hopefully the word gets out by, you know, entertainment channels and these days social media and stuff. But to do something like that in 2006 or even, you know, prior to some other franchises, it's a weird thing. What you're expecting the audience to bring into the experience.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at the creative team here. The movie is written by Michael Dougherty and Dan Harris. Now, a lot of the creative work is actually done together. Probably most significantly before this, they were both writers on X2. Now, Michael Dougherty, however, has also gone on to write and direct a lot of his projects. Like, he's got Trick or Treat and Krampus to his name. 2, like, cult Halloween films that are, you know, modern cult classics. I think it's pretty interesting. He's behind both of them. He's also involved in a lot of the Godzilla versus Kong stuff these days.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize this was that Michael Dougherty when I first read all this. So he and Dan Harris collaborated on a lot of things, probably notably X-Men 2, Urban Legends Bloody Mary, which is like the weird direct-to-video third installment of the Urban Legends series. So I'm like morbidly curious, because it has to be better than the second one, right? Anyway, hashtag PP. But so then they work together on Superman Returns, and then they do team up again for X-Men Apocalypse, work getting a story credit together on that. But then, like I said, Michael Dougherty kind of does his own thing. He does Trick or Treat, Krampus. Then he gets writing, directing credit on Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and then has a story credit on Godzilla vs. Kong. And apparently will be getting a writing credit on Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, which, that's a cool title.
Do you think it's pronounced Godzilla X Kong? I just say that because there's a video game called Street Fighter X Tekken, where the franchises fight each other, but it's pronounced Street Fighter Cross Tekken.
Maybe it's Godzilla Cross Kong. That would also be cool. I accept either.
That still sounds cool. It still sounds cool.
I was gonna say I accept either result. I'm fine with either. But it is very, very excuse me. It is a varied career. A whole lot of different things. Dan Harris, a little bit less stuff more recently. Did direct a movie called Speech and Debate, which I've not seen. But yeah, interesting to see them here on. I mean, what a career for Michael Dougherty. I mean, X-Men, Superman, Krampus, Trick or Treat, Godzilla. it's pretty much hitting all the big things. Like hard to have a bad time that when you get to work on all the different stuff that he has. So,
and we've danced around it a little bit already, but the movie is directed by Bryan Singer. We've talked about this man's movies before. We talked about X-Men movies. I think Apocalypse might have been the only one we covered that he actually directed, but not a good person. And as sort of an open secret, his crimes that have been committed, he has faced a lot of consequences for it, but as of now, not actual prison time. I expect it's coming. Hasn't yet. That's all to say that we're not going to talk about him. There's also a certain actor in this movie, plays the villain. Got nothing nice to say about that person either. It's a big reason that we didn't cover this movie for so long. But as we said, plenty of other positives that we want to talk about in this film. That sound fair to you, Andrew?
That sounds completely fair. And I just do want to say to anyone that if you do not want to listen to the rest of this episode because of the fact that those people are associated with this film, I completely understand and respect that decision. But like I said, they will not. Neither of those men will be mentioned going forward.
With that being said, Andrew, it's time that we fly into this movie. Superman.
You already ruined
returns.
me last week. There's no options at this point. There's no bar too low now.
Are you ready to talk about it?
Yes, let's do it.
After 5 years off planet, Superman returns to Earth and resumes his duties as protector. In his absence, Lois Lane won a Pulitzer Prize for her article, Why the World Doesn't Need Superman. Their relationship is strained, and is further exacerbated when Superman learns that Lois is engaged to Richard White and raising their son together. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor is released from prison and uses material from Superman's homeworld to create a new continent that he will claim ownership of. Superman faces off against Lex on the new landmass, but succumbs to the kryptonite hidden within. After Lois and Richard save Superman from drowning, he makes one last attempt to stop Lex Luthor. Simple enough. I mean, as we kind of talked about a little bit in the intro there, these are almost like parallel lines, this relationship stuff between Superman and Lois and Lex Luthor carrying out his plan. Andrew, you texted me like the timestamp of when we actually get Superman and Lex facing off, but it's pretty deep into this movie.
It's a 2 hour and 34-minute movie. They do not face off until an hour and 52 minutes in, which is 30 minutes after Lois boards Lex's yacht. This is a very, very long movie, folks. Which is not inherently a problem. But yeah, like overall, and that was another thing people kind of pointed out. They're like, Lex with a real estate thing. They're like, kind of. If I had a nickel,
that's what he does. The man likes land, Andrew.
If I had a nickel for every Superman movie where Lex has a land plot, I'd have 10 cents. It's not a lot. Weird it happened twice. But yeah, it's overall just Lex with a scheme that obviously has something to do with Superman and looking to kill two birds with one stone, as it were.
Well, Andrew, before we jump into this plot and dissect this 2.5 hour movie, let's talk about the cast, specifically the best casting and best performance of the film. Every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. And we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, go ahead and kick us off. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Superman Returns?
I'm going to be going with our new version of Lois Lane, Kate Bosworth. She steps into the role of intrepid reporter Lois Lane here, which has been, like I said, it's a role that has been inhabited by many over the years. I remember her from such films as Remember the Titans and Blue Crush.
You saw that one? I never saw that one. I'm very familiar with it, but I never actually saw it.
I mean, I've seen it. Yes.
Okay. I was looking through her filmography because, like, Remember Titans, everybody's seen that. But Blue Crush, Win a Date with Tad Hamilton, these are titles that I know. I saw on the video rental shelves, I guess. Probably played on, like, Comedy Central ad nauseum or whatever, but I never saw them.
Yeah, I am still out there doing her thing, but here she's kind of tasked with this very interesting version of Lois that kind of resents Superman to start this film. Over the course of the film, that relationship kind of softens a bit, but at the beginning, she doesn't like him because he left unannounced for 5 years, and she took that personally. And I mean, folks, why wouldn't you? like it's kind of a straight. It's one of those weird things where you just kind of. It's like, yeah, he vanished for 5 years unannounced, and yeah. So she wrote a whole.
Their coworker Clark Kent also disappeared for a 5-year period. It was a tough 5 years for her.
I get it. Especially when you find out some of the stuff she was going with. But it's in that absence, she wrote an article called "Why the World Doesn't Need Superman" that she won a Pulitzer for. And when Clark comes back, he kind of is faced with this reality that everybody's moved on. Which, again, you left for 5 years, bud, unannounced. No one to blame but yourself. But I think it's a tough spot to sit in, kind of doing that version of Lois who kind of actively doesn't like Superman. Superman and Lois is like a hallmark. There's a show on television right now called Superman and Lois. So it's a wild thing to kind of have to be this version of the character who doesn't like Superman, or at least presents it that way. Like, over the course of it, you kind of realize that once he's back, she kind of maybe doesn't hate this guy as much as she thought. So there's a lot of layers to the performance. There's obviously a lot of resentment that she has towards Superman when he returns, and I think Kate Bosworth does a great job at balancing all of that and trying to make it into something a little bit different than what we've seen before. And I think she does a good job with that. Still got some hallmarks of the Margot Kidder version of the character, notably not knowing how to spell things. Asks how many F's are in catastrophic. 0, Lois. But a lot of fun stuff like that. The kind of homages they're making with that, the throwbacks to the previous version of the character. And it's all pretty fun. And like I said, I like what she's doing. Like I said, it's a tough spot to sit, especially given how iconic that Margot Kidder performance is. And I think she's up to the task.
Great pick, Andrew. I do agree it is a tough spot. I mean, you've got... Obviously, there's going to be some kind of romance with Superman, but it's such an interesting position where she has this fiance. They've got a kid together. Like, she's got to show that she doesn't... Like, she loves this man who's been there for her for these past 5 years, but obviously there's conflicting feelings as Superman returns. And I said the thing. And it puts her in a tough spot, and I think she plays it very well. And again, I'm not super familiar with a lot of her work, as I mentioned the stuff before this, but this feels like her kind of one of her like growing up roles, kind of graduating from like teen young adult comedies to a much more mature performance, and I think she makes the leap wonderfully, and it's a very good performance. I think she's Lois Lane has had some really good casting over the course of Superman films. I think they've pretty consistently knocked it out of the park with their Lois Lanes, this one being no exception.
I agree.
But Andrew, in my heart of hearts, I've got to give the Mark Strong Award to someone else. There's someone in this movie that was really just popping off the screen for me. Every single scene they are in totally worked and stole the show every time. The epitome of the Mark Strong Award. I've got to give it to Parker Posey as Kitty Kowalski, one of Lex Luthor's henchwomen, or is basically his right-hand woman. Parker Posey, herself, an alum of the show. We've previously covered Josie and the Pussycats. She might have popped up somewhere else too, but do not recall if she won a Mark Strong Award there, because rudely I was not invited to be on the Josie and the Pussycats episode. But she's definitely getting one now for her role here. I freaking love this character. She's playing, and I saw on Wikipedia, she's inspired by another character. Like, there's been like an aloof hint women in the Superman movies before, but gets a new name, gets her own take on it. Very much like a Harley Quinn to Joker dynamic, where Lex clearly doesn't care about her, is willing to put her in harm's way. She's supposed to cause a distraction to distract Superman by driving her car off the road, acting like her brakes are out, but Lex actually cuts her brake lines because he doesn't actually care about her. And she kind of starts to wise up by the end and not going with Lex so easily. So there's a little bit of an arc there. But again, Harley Joker type dynamic where she, at the end of the day, is a bad person. But the comedy, I mean, Parker Posey is just a hilarious person in everything that she's in. But the comedy she gets out of this, her line deliveries. I mean, the one I used for the intro when Lex puts the small little crystal in the water and they're all waiting for a reaction. And she says, "Wow, that's really something, Lex." And he's wait for it. And she waits like 2 seconds before giving the exact same line delivery. "Wow, that's really something, Lex." Beautifully dry delivery that absolutely killed me. And that very same scene, he's describing the crystal and he says, "It's like a seed and all it needs is water." And she says, "Like, sea monkeys." That was the first comparison she could think to something that's a seed and needs water to grow, Andrew. It's very funny because plant is more obvious, you see.
Yes.
I love this character.
Yes.
Cracking me up. I love the scene where she drives the car and has to get saved by Superman. How hysterical she's acting or not pretending to act because her brakes were actually cut. It's great. Like I said, steals every scene she's in. So for that reason, getting my Mark Strong award.
I think this is a great pick. The comparisons they're making are to kind of like Miss Tessmacher from the first film, who it's a very similar relationship. Lex really doesn't care about her, but also she ends up being sympathetic towards Superman and also ends up kind of turning on Lex later in the film. As she doesn't do outright here, but she definitely foils his plan. And Kitty Kowalski, I don't believe is somebody that exists. Don't believe is somebody that exists in the comics. So this is a character for the film. But it's Parker Posey. I mean, she's got this I say legendary career, but things, Waiting for Guffman, Best in Show, all the mockumentary stuff she's done with Christopher Guest. She's hilarious in all of them. I still like Best in Show is one of my favorite movies. I love that movie so much, and she's fantastic in it. A Mighty Wind, which she's also in, and even more recent stuff he's done like Mascots. I think she's always funny. She's always on point. She was in Blade Trinity as well.
There it is. Yeah, I knew we talked about her before. Yeah.
So, but then stuff like that, Superman Returns, Josie and the Pussycats. She was on that recent Lost in Space reboot. She's been all over the place, and she's just always wonderful. She never phones it in. She is always hilarious, and I am never going to be sad to see her on my screen. And this movie is zero exception. She is, like you said, stealing every scene that she's in. The rapport she has with Lex is a bit different than what we've seen in the past, where she can, she's not really afraid of Lex, generally speaking, not really towards the end, but overall she has no problem like back-talking him and kind of snarking him. And I like that. And she's just, it's Parker Posey, man. Like, how are you going to go wrong? You can't. So fantastic pick, a fantastic addition to this film. She was apparently the only person considered for the role of Kitty Kowalski, and so I'm thankful for that.
James Marsden plays Richard White, who is Perry White's nephew, I think, who comes in as an assistant editor, and obviously is fiance now to Lois Lane. Here's what I find interesting about this, Andrew. I think most people know that this movie is the reason that Cyclops is killed so early in X3. Spoilers for X3. But Cyclops is hardly in that movie. He gets killed off super early because James Marsden went off to make Superman Returns instead. So it's Kelth's character. And the idea that James Marsden would turn down the role of Cyclops, which is pretty prominent in the X-Men film series, to take the most thankless job in this entire movie. You're Lois Lane's new love interest. Like, no one's going to be rooting for you because they want you back with Superman. You're not playing like a jerk. You're not like outstanding as a villain. Like, he's doing a good job, but like, it is so thankless, his role here. But whenever I remember hearing that this was the reason he wasn't in X3, I assumed he was going for the role of Superman. But no, he's Lois's new flame, Richard White. Go from Cyclops to Richard White. But like, he does a good job. James Marsden's a good actor. I like him anytime he pops up. The highest cheekbones in the business, as they say. But yeah, Richard White, he's a good dude. You're not, the easy thing to do in these situations usually is to cast the new love interest as like a jerk. I don't like when they do that. I'm glad they don't do it here because it makes it, in this case, it would make Lois look dumb for being with someone who's obviously bad. So I don't like that trope. I'm glad they don't do it here. Genuinely a good dude, the most understanding man in the world. Like, Superman comes back, he knows there's a history there, he can sense it. Their son, he might know that it's actually Superman's kid. Like, we don't know, but he's very understanding, encouraged Lois to work together with Superman again. Honestly, just a really good dude.
Yeah, it really is a strange role. It's actually very interesting that, like, he turns down X-Men for this. And I feel like I've read a story that there was maybe a little bit more to it. Like, he wasn't super happy with what they were going to do with Cyclops on X3, because that franchise had very much become like the Wolverine show by that point. So it's very possible that he thought a more prominent role here was going to be the bigger thing. But either way, he's a sizable role as well. He's not like, he's a supporting player only in the sense that Superman is the lead of the movie, but he is prominently featured. He features in the finale several times. It is involved. He is in this movie, and it is an interesting performance because, like you said, he's not a bad dude. In fact, you're kind of like, there's more than one moment in this movie where I was like, would you have to come back and ruin everything, Superman? Like, why'd you have to do that? Like, it's definitely a little strange, but like you said, I prefer when they cast it that way, where it's not, it's not somebody that's like purposely portrayed as antagonistic. Like, you think of any comedy about a divorced dad, the new stepfather is always like, he's either a stiff or he's a jerk or he's always played for laughs because he's not the real dad. There's Liar Liar, Mrs. Doubtfire, all of it.
Ant-Man.
Ant-Man, the stepfather is always portrayed as like an obstacle. And in this one, he's an obstacle, but not really because he's mean or because he's different or whatever. In this one, it's very much just he's a good dude, and you're kind of like, man, I wish he wasn't. That would make this a lot easier than what's clearly about to happen. But but I mean, he's doing a great job here. He's got like an interesting part to play. I mean, and he's very like the byline on the thing here is that Lois Lane picked somebody who's very Superman-esque, and yeah, he is. He's and even in the thick of the movie, like Lois gets kidnapped by Lex Luthor, Superman goes after her, and so does he in his plane by himself.
Yeah,
like he goes to save Lois with no powers. Like, it's weird to say out loud, but there's nothing more Superman than going in to save somebody when you don't have the advantage. Like, that's about as Superman as it gets. And,
Superman isn't Superman because of his powers. Superman is Superman because of his choices.
Yes. A very excellent way to look at it. And this dude does Superman things with, he does the right, like, there's no question to him that saving Lois is exactly what he needs to do. So he goes and he does it. And then when Lois asks him to go back and save Superman, he does that too.
Is he the hero of this movie? Is that what we're discovering?
He might be. That's kind of what I feel like I'm driving at. Wasn't my point, but it kind of feels like that's where I'm ended up. So, but yeah, I mean, without him, Lois doesn't get out of the boat. Superman doesn't get out of the water. Like, there's a lot of things that don't happen if Richard White is not as good a dude as he is.
That's the legacy sequel we need now. Richard Returns.
Richard Returns. Oh man. So salute to you, James Marsden. You played Superman in a movie that also features Superman. So nice work.
Frank Langella plays Perry White. Now look, we know what they're doing here. They're casting a legend of the theater and screen, decades-long career. The dude has just that presence. He has... Andrew, what would you say Frank is bringing to this movie?
Gravitas.
That's it. That's the stuff. He's got it in spades. Not a ton of screen time. Another role that throughout Superman movies I think has always been very well cast, very memorable. And they're a little soft on the characterization. He's almost like he's supportive of Lois in his own way, but he's not brash. He's not screaming and yelling, demanding things too much. He's also not like a wise ass. Like we'll see Fish in his performance as Perry White later on.
He's Fish.
It's Fish, man. What can you say about Fish? But yeah, I liked this take on the character, and like I said, just a legend. There's nothing negative to say about it at all.
Did you know he was married to Whoopi Goldberg for 5 years?
Andrew, I did not know
that. Is that my brain just can't seem to like wrap itself around
in
that
what
for
decade?
Some reason. 95 to 2000.
How about that?
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, he's kind of just playing on shades of the Perry Whites we've seen before. I think that's kind of like, there's not a lot to him, but like the idea here very much is like, he's just Perry White. You know, he gets to say Great Caesar's Ghost at one point, which is a classic Perry White line.
Andrew, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Has anyone in real life ever said that? Is that really like an old-timey thing? Or is that totally made up for like comic books?
Chris, nobody talks that way.
But like ever though, right?
I would assume that it's not something anybody's actually said. I'm sure after my dad listens to this, he will in fact tell me that no, people did used to say that.
I don't know.
I don't believe it though.
What does Ron Burgundy say? Like Odin's beard or something?
He says lots of things, Chris.
That's true. He does be saying stuff.
He's, by the hammer of Thor, great Odin's raven. That's what it is.
There it is. That's what I was thinking.
So it's just that
I feel like he's just riffing on all this made up nonsense that no one ever actually said.
I'm pretty sure Great Caesar's Ghost is just something he's always said in the comics. I don't think it's anything. I know in the 90s show, Lois and Clark, the Perry White there, played by Lane Smith, was a Elvis fan, so he would say like great shades of Elvis, stuff like that. But
what?
Because again, people talk that way. But yeah, otherwise he's just riffing on all the Perry Whites that have come before. Like you said, he's kind of just, I don't mean this in a bad way, but like he's kind of just there. Like he's not really like driving it. Like he's just, Superman's back. He's like, Superman's a story. Give me Superman. Give me pictures of Superman. He's just J. Jonah Jameson without the anger. That's it. Give me pictures of Superman. But and when Jimmy doesn't get him pictures of Superman, he's upset. But yeah, I mean, like you said, just a legend of the screen. Been in everything that you can imagine, and does a good job here, bringing some of that gravitas to Perry White.
Andrew, I have a quick story to tell you. It's about physical media, a topic that we are both very passionate about. We've got a new channel on our Discord dedicated to physical media. You got some cool physical media? Take a picture and show us. Let's all celebrate it together. So, I mentioned back on our Mission Impossible 2 episode, must have been the first time I brought it up. No, it was during the Matrix month where Lawrence Fishburne, talking about Lawrence Fishburne a lot. Fish, what can you say about Fish? Because in this behind the scenes special features documentary from the Mission Impossible 3 Blu-ray, Tom Cruise in an interview just keeps referring to Lawrence Fishburne as Fish because they're buddies that go way back. Oh, me and Fish are great friends. And it was so strange to really hammer this nickname home that I've never heard anyone else use, right? And so you and we can't help but say Fish when Lawrence Fishburne comes up because it's Fish.
It's Fish.
And I I looked through YouTube for Mission Impossible 3 special features, documentaries. I scrubbed through them. I found a few. Couldn't find that interview with Tom Cruise. So I'm like, all right, I've got to pull this thing out. I've got to rip it, upload on YouTube myself, and share this with the world. Now, here's the quick history of my Mission Impossible 3 Blu-ray. I bought it when it first came out. I'm a huge fan of the franchise. I take pride in buying those like first editions of the physical media. Like my Iron Man Blu-ray is like, it's the slipcover, where the slipcover is Iron Man and you pull it off and it's Tony Stark with the arc reactor. You know, they've released that movie 5 more times since then. Now it's a very generic background. I like those first releases, and I had the first release of the Mission Impossible 3 Blu-ray. That's a series they've released a bunch of times. They give them all like the same cover. They did the series of like white covers, and then more recently they re-released them for 4K. They've all got this red and black color scheme. But I had the original, and Andrew, I lost it at some point. Last time I remember having it, I know I loaned it to mutual friend Doug. I'm not saying he's the one that lost it, but that's the last time I remember seeing it. At some point, I had to repurchase Mission Impossible 3 with one of those newer covers. Okay? You might see where I'm going with this. I pull out my old Blu-ray, because I'm going to go through these special features. I'm going to rip them. And I put the disc in, and there's no special features. It's just play, chapter select, subtitles. Those are my only options.
Bummer.
I know that there's special features because I watched them. Andrew, I eject the disc. The only disc that is in this package. But on the disc label, it says Mission Impossible 3, Disc 1. It still says Disc 1. They repackaged just one disc from the initial release. Didn't bother to change the disc label. Don't have any special features with it. You know how irritating it is to have a movie that says Disc 1 and there's not another disc in your set? Huge pet peeve of mine. So that's my sad story. I don't have the interview to share with everyone, where Tom Cruise keeps referring to Lawrence Fishburne as Fish. Hey, if someone out there has Disc 2, help us out. Let's recover this.
They just did
footage.
a steelbook. They just did all new steelbooks for the whole series. Maybe I'll buy it. Maybe that's my excuse to buy all of them and see if it's on there.
I have on 4K. I have the collection 1 through 6. I think I might have the Blu-rays with it, but I don't know if it has. It's probably just the Disc 1 situation again, so I don't know.
See.
I'll listen there. But the search continues. I will get that uploaded for everybody. Maybe I'll check Half Price Books for one of the old releases. But yeah, that's my story. Sam Huntington plays Jimmy Olsen in this movie. Andrew, I really like this performance, and kind of like Perry White, like he's not really influencing the plot or anything, just adding some humor. But I think this is such good casting for Jimmy Olsen. He's got such a youthful, naive, gosh gee Willikers appearance. And I know this actor. I know Sam Huntington. I'm looking at him, like, man, he looks really familiar. And I looked at his filmography. He's in Not Another Teen Movie I've seen a ton. Pretty funny. He's one of the main actors there. But I knew him from something else. I know him as Mimi Siku. He's in the Tim Allen movie, Jungle to Jungle. He is the Tim Allen's son that he had with a native person. That it's a strange movie, but at any rate, I saw that movie a lot as a kid, and that was Sam Huntington. He's got the same boyish face years later.
And then he drinks a beer. That's really weird. No, I actually do really like this performance as well. Apparently, this was offered to Shawn Ashmore. Apparently, Singer just tried to like scoop his entire X-Men cast to be in this.
We're going to DC now.
And ended up not. He was dedicated to X3, which he has a much bigger part in. So we get Sam Huntington here. I think he does a great job. All around. I do like this performance a lot. He does have that boyish energy, but it doesn't feel super dated. Like, it doesn't feel totally out of place in this kind of weird world we've kind of constructed with this like modern technology, but we've got this retro futuristic architecture style. I like how it all comes together. I do. And I think he does a great job. Chris, we haven't talked about Superman.
How did that happen?
I don't know if you noticed this, but we have not talked about Brandon Routh as Superman. Like,
Wait a minute. You're right, Andrew. We have to talk about the lead of this movie.
I was like, are we really going to just pass up Superman?
I think it's because you mentioned his name earlier. Maybe in my brain, I was like, oh, we talked about him already. Yeah. Brandon Routh. Andrew, when I was trying to get all the pronunciations right, and I Googled it before we started recording, like how to say his name. And the very first result on Google, it's like Google telling you how to say his name. It says Brandon Routh. It says it's pronounced Ruth. But you've always pronounced it Routh. I looked at an interview and they introduced him as Routh, so maybe that is it. It's just something about playing Superman. People are going to say your last name incorrectly. Christopher Reeve, that's not how to pronounce, but everyone insists on saying Christopher Reeves with an S. Brandon Routh, Brandon Routh, Henry Cavill. I don't know, Andrew.
And now we've got David Cornsweet. There's no way people aren't going to mess that up.
Cornsweet? What is this guy's name?
Corn. Yeah.
Cornsweet.
I think it's David Cornsweet. Yes, David Cornsweet. The first American to play Superman in a film since Brandon Routh.
I mean, it's
only one guy.
Yeah, it's in that extreme.
Since 2006. That makes it sound much better. But yeah, Brandon Routh. A relative unknown. I would say a massive unknown at the time. Taking on the role of Superman, which is like that was deliberate choice. Apparently, Jim Caviezel was interested. Jesus himself wanted to take on Superman next. But they kind of insisted on doing a kind of unknown. So they went with Brandon Routh, who he was cast because he looks like Christopher Reeve. It's kind of you don't like saying it out loud, but that was a big part of it.
And that doesn't mean he's a bad actor or anything.
No, by no means.
That was the selling point.
That was what they were going for. That's definitely the vibe they want. And I think he does a good job with what he's given. Now, that sounds a little backhanded, but Superman doesn't really have much to say in this movie. He's just kind of reacting to the things that are happening in front of him. Or as our mutual friend Doug once said, this movie is about Superman lifting progressively heavier things.
I mean, folks,
fish. I do like this performance. I tend to agree with people that were like, I felt like he could have done a little bit more. I do agree with that. I think there was a lot more he could have given to the role. Something he gets to do a little bit of later on. I'll talk about that in a minute. But for the sake of this film, I think he's doing exactly what's asked of him. He's he at no point watching this movie was I like, that dude's not Superman. He's Superman. He's got the look. He's got the aesthetics. He gets the dichotomy between Clark and Superman a little bit. Has a moment where he tries to do the Christopher Reeve thing where he takes the glasses off and like corrects the posture. But no one can do that.
I was gonna say he does a good there's totally separate performances, Clark Kent and Superman. You gotta be able to do that if you're gonna play the character. He's very good at it, but you can't help but be like, he's just not good as Christopher Reeve, which is, again, it feels unfair because that's the gold standard and all, but this movie is asking you to make those comparisons. He's literally walking in the man's shadow. There's nothing he could have done to escape it. So it's really unfair to put that on him. But he really goes for his Clark Kent is goofy as hell. I mean, there's one where he's talking to Lois. What does he say? Hang on, I gotta get this right. Oh, and he's asking her about the plane crash he was on, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, I heard about you." And he mimics. He puts his arm straight down, wrist flex, so his hands go out to either side. So his hands are little airplane wings, and he just kind of waggles back and forth. He doesn't say the word airplane. He's like, "I heard about you," and he does a little motion to do an airplane. It's the dorkiest thing.
Yep.
But he really goes for it with just being a total, klutz as Clark as you do, and it's pretty good. He's pretty good at it. No Reeve, no one is, so can't really hold that against him. But he's definitely putting the work in.
He is, and like you said, it's an unfortunate thing because there was no way you weren't going to make that comparison. And yeah, that being said, Brandon Routh ends up having a bit of an interesting journey when he ended up joining the Arrowverse, originally as Ray Palmer / the Atom, playing a not the second character by the name of the Atom, not to be confused with the Atom / Atom Smasher from our Black Adam episode. This is the other version, but
not the version that is Godfather to Atom Smasher. That's
no.
A separate version.
That's the original Atom. Ray Palmer is the second Atom.
Okay.
Oh boy. Yes, exactly. But what he does get to do that's interesting on those shows is they eventually did a Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover where they brought in a lot of different actors from a lot of different all the active shows at the time. But a lot of people ended up coming in as some guest actors. This included people like Tom Welling as a version of Smallville's Superman. The cast of Titans showed up. The guy from Lucifer showed up. John Wesley Shipp, who played the Flash in the early 90s, got to show up as that version of the Flash. Ashley Scott from Birds of Prey. Like, they brought in a lot of different characters, but what they ended up doing was getting Brandon Routh to return as a version of Superman. This one being modeled after the Kingdom Come version of Superman. The implication there kind of being that it's supposed to sort of be the same version of the character. And they make mention of what happens in Kingdom Come, which is that Joker gasses the Daily Planet and kills Lois and many others. So he got a brief little coda to kind of come back and put a stamp on Superman there that I thought was pretty cool. And they do make at least one reference of, wow, this guy looks a lot like Ray Palmer, doesn't he? So they have some fun with that, but I thought it was very cool that Brandon Routh did get a chance to kind of bring that full circle and get one more chance to kind of suit up as Superman in a suit that's kind of as iconic to comic book fans as the Kingdom Come Superman suit is. So that was cool. But as for this movie, he's, like I said, he's doing everything that's asked of him, and I think he's doing a really admirable job. But that shadow is big, especially when you draw the lines as cleanly as they do here. Like Henry Cavill never really got those comparisons so much because it was so stylistically different. But with this movie trying to just make all those connections, there was no way he was going to be able to escape from that. It's unfortunate. Like I said, I think he had more to give to the role, but like I said, he's doing everything he needs to do here.
With that being said, Andrew, I think it's time we jump into this movie. Specifically, all the best parts and favorite scenes of the film, starting with the best scene, or at least our personal favorite. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders, and what is the best scene of Superman Returns?
I am a sucker for Superman doing Superman things, so my favorite is going to be the plane rescue. This is pretty early on. It's Superman's kind of grand public return or his return to the public eye. To this point, he's kind of been mostly kind of drifting around, not really doing too much, but this is his big re-debut, as it were, when he finds out that this kind of this is a test flight for a space shuttle that's going to be launched into space, kind of piggybacking off an airliner. I forget exactly why they're doing this, but it's a power outage caused by Lex Luthor interferes with it, and it doesn't disconnect. So you've got this space shuttle firing its rockets and kind of taking this airliner along for the ride, and everybody's getting knocked around. So Superman comes in to save the day. And I love this scene as well, because this is definitely something you couldn't have done this in 78. You couldn't have.
Yeah.
Like the technology wasn't there. And I'm sure there's some people on the science side that are like, oh, well, if Superman caught the plane as it came down, it would have crushed the whole thing. Stop watching the movie wrong. But it's a cool sequence. You get Superman saving the shuttle first, sending it off into space, And then you've got this really riveting kind of tense scene where Superman's trying to stop this plane, and at every turn, like the wings fall off, like he's having trouble. And finally, he just goes to the front and basically just pushes up against it, and ultimately brings it down just in time to kind of land in the middle of this baseball field, which I think is just a cool set piece for something like this. And I just love watching it because it's Superman being Superman. And I think it's done really, really well. I think a lot of this holds up, even the CG. I think it's done pretty well. And I just, like I said, I had a blast watching it. Even now, I was sucked right back in that whole time where he's kind of every additional obstacle is met with Superman just flying back, because that's what Superman does. And this scene will always be a favorite of mine, even if the movie itself isn't necessarily. I will never get tired of watching that scene. It is so well done.
Yeah, I'm just gonna have to agree. Is also my favorite scene of the movie. Superman doing Superman things. I think this movie has a good bit of that. I think almost all the action scenes are very Superman. He's saving the everyman a lot. I think it gets higher marks in that regard, but this is the ultimate version of that. This extended action set piece where he's saving this plane full of people, and of course Lois is one of the people on the plane. And I do like the escalation, because like the plane is spiraling out of control. He tries to stop the spiral by slowing down one of the wings. That wing rips off. It spirals more. And it just kind of progresses from there, like what he can do to save it before it ends up crashing into the ground. And I love that it ends up in the baseball field, because at first you're like, well, okay, he's guiding it towards like a clearing, because you've got to have a place to put this thing down, and that makes sense. But the fact that after he successfully lands it, there's an audience there to applaud and cheer, that just feels so right for Superman. He does heroics,
right, and
everyone gets to applaud and cheer. It's kind of corny, kind of hokey, but kind of works. And it's just, like I said, very Superman. I like that Lois is on the plane. She's being heroic herself. She's helping people get buckled. She gets tossed around a lot because she herself isn't able to get strapped in until much later into this descent. I agree, the special effects hold it very well. I particularly like towards the end when he's at the nose of the plane, catching it before it crashes. There's these ripples that go all the way up the plane as the metal starts buckling. It looks very good. As he, finally is able to wrest it onto the ground. And then the most Superman thing, Andrew, he gets onto the plane, he addresses everybody, makes sure everyone is safe, and he says, I hope this experience hasn't put any of you off of flying. Statistically speaking, it's still the safest way to travel. That's Superman, right?
That's Superman.
That's Superman. That's what he does. It's great.
It's fish. No,
it's soups.
It's soups. No, I love stuff like this. There's actually a brand new comic that just came out, and it's called Superman: The Last Days of Lex Luthor. And it's written by Mark Waid and drawn by Brian Hitch, and it's a Superman book, which basically means I've been waiting 20 years for this book to exist. Because Mark Waid is one of my favorite writers, and the idea of Mark Waid and Brian Hitch doing Superman is something that in 2002-3 would have blown my mind. I would have been like, oh, because I love Superman Birthright, which was a Superman book Mark Waid did. But the book is so interesting because what it is Luthor basically goes to Superman and is like, I'm dying. Basically, he was doing a radiation experiment and it went wrong. And he ended up getting exposed to 17 types of radiation. And Superman finds out. And basically, Lex uses Superman's personality against him. He's like, you're not going to let me die. You can't do that. That's not what Superman does. And Superman has that moment of just fine. And what Lex ends up doing is he broadcasts the speech to the world so that the world sees Superman agree to help save Lex Luthor's life. Which just puts Superman in a terrible place. But even in the face of that, Superman is still exhausting all of his options. He's taking him to the bottled city of Kandor. He's in the Phantom Zone. Time doesn't pass, so maybe that can buy you some more time while we try to figure it out. He's still being Superman to Lex Luthor in the face of literally public ridicule because Superman just agreed to save Lex Luthor's life, but also the antagonization of Luthor from those angles too. And there's just this there's just this nobility to Superman that thankfully we've kind of come around. Like when I was in high school, college, like when this movie came out, like if I said, "Hey, I'm a Superman fan," my friends would have made fun of me. They would have been like, "Superman, like come on, dude." They were all Batman fans.
Those damn Batman fans.
Well, it's not like any of them had the bat symbol tattooed on them or anything. But like I remember one dude was like, "Dude, you like Superman?" He's like, "That's like being the popular kid in high school." And I was like, "What does that even mean? Like, what are you talking about?" Like I didn't understand. It was just such a weird thing to say, but like people really didn't dig Superman. And I've always loved the character because I love the notion of a character who the powers don't make them the superhero. Who they are makes them the superhero. And characters especially that generally speaking are not driven by some intense tragedy. Now, there's tragedy in Superman's story, absolutely, because of the death of Krypton, the death of his father, but like he's not a character driven by tragedy like, say, Batman is. Or he's not like Green Lantern, who's chosen by an intergalactic peacekeeping corps to be Green Lantern. It's like Superman, Captain America, very similar. Like he's chosen because of who he is. They're like, the powers can go to anybody, but we need you to be the right person to get those powers. The original version of Barry Allen, very similar. There was no tragedy in his life. Like the idea of, his father going to jail for the murder of his mother, that's all last 15 years. That's a very recent change to Barry Allen. Which personally I'm not a huge fan of, because I think adding a ton of tragedy to Barry Allen's origin changes the foundation of that character to the point that they're almost two different characters now. There's the Silver Age Barry Allen, and then there's the returned Barry Allen. They're essentially two different people because they are different. And I love when Superman, even in the face of those things, like you said, it would have been easy for him to be like, I'm not going to help Lex Luthor. But he does it anyway, because he knows that if he doesn't, then he's not Superman. So I will always love seeing Superman just unabashedly being Superman. I remember when there was going to be a story that Tony Stark was adopted. I remember this in the comics. They were like, Tony Stark's adopted. And I remember I had a friend that was just like, wow, this is going to be such a great thing for like visibility to like adopted children, adopted families, things like that. And I was like, Superman's like right over there, right? Like that's kind of in the poster of that the whole time. And they were like, yeah, but nobody likes Superman. And I was like, well, that's it's like, that's not fair. Like that
hurts.
So, but for me, there's that do the right thing because it's the right thing. That's it's a thing that I try to remember in my own life day to day as much as I can. That if you're doing things with the expectation of a reward, how good is it? So yeah.
Superman, he's a good dude. He's a good dude, Andrew.
It's Soups.
What can you say about Soups? Like I said, I think there's a lot of Superman being Superman in this. There's this montage towards the end that I was kind of thinking about for favorite scene, but the set piece of the airplane is just so well done, and so it hits stronger than a montage is going to. But it's whenever the landmass is coming up and things are shifting, and there's almost like an earthquake hitting Metropolis, and he is flying around the city just helping the normal people. There's this thing where he's flying down the road, and like all this debris is falling off a building, and he looks back and uses his heat vision to make like this wall of heat, I guess, to melt the debris as it goes through so it don't fall on the people. It's like as he's passing by, he's saving like these random people on the street, just doing literally everything he can to save as many people as possible. He saves Perry White from the big globe that's falling off. You get this great shot of him like holding the Daily Planet globe, like he's Atlas holding
or something.
Very cool. I mean, not subtle, but cool imagery. I like it. Yeah, I think. You can look at this movie as lacking action. He doesn't punch people. I can get how it can be a bummer, but like that is I don't know. If he punches anybody in this movie, he kills them. Like, there's no super powered
Right.
people here. Like, I don't know. That can be a problem writing Superman sometimes. I get it, but the stuff that we do get, what he chooses to use his powers for, I think is a statement in and of itself. I wouldn't be surprised if creatively the writers made a conscious effort to not have him do combat, challenge themselves with other ways he can use his powers to save people versus hurting people and attacking people, because that's pretty in line with like the Christopher Reeve kind of classic version is of this character.
I agree completely. It is just good stuff that's fun to see. Like, just, seeing Superman, even in that moment, just still not being deterred from helping people, which is another aspect of the character that people kind of, they're like, they're like, it's like, man, if helping people is lame, then we're doomed as a people. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, Jesus. But there is a weird little factoid I want to give you, Chris.
Lay it on me, Andrew.
Somebody in this movie was in a film with Marlon Brando.
Well, everybody in this movie was in a film with Marlon Brando.
Somebody in this film was in a different movie with Marlon Brando.
Okay, well, he was alive.
Yes.
All right, let's see if I can figure this out.
I'm sure you can.
Frank Langella's been in everything for decades. Was he ever in a movie with Marlon Brando?
He's not the one I'm thinking of.
Okay. Brendan Rogers. Andrew, I don't know.
It is Ava Marie Saint who plays Martha Kent.
Okay, that makes sense.
I immediately
started looking through the older people in the cast.
She was not just in a film with Marlon Brando. She was in On the Waterfront, and it was her film debut.
Wow.
Here, I'm going to continue, Chris. Ava Marie Saint is still alive. She is 99. And she most recently was a voice on The Legend of Korra.
Huh. Well, good for you, Ava
which
Marie
was
Saint.
an Avatar spinoff. So I just did want to give a shout out. She does come in as Martha Kent here, only a couple of scenes. But also, obviously, for many people, noted as the femme fatale in North by Northwest. That might be, in many ways, her most famous role, even though you were literally On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando. But she is in, that's just it's a fantastic film. North by Northwest is just one of the high moments of Alfred Hitchcock's career, and her performance as Eve alongside Cary Grant is a big part of that. But just wanted to give a shout out to her. There's a couple of other shout outs I wanted to make real quick, just because they're a bit small things, but they're cool. During the plane rescue sequence, when we're dealing with the power outages, Jimmy and Clark go to a bar, and the bartender is played by a gentleman named Jack Larson. Now, Jack Larson, offhand, is probably not a name that you are super familiar with, but on the original Adventures of Superman television series from 1952 to 1958, Jack Larson played the role of Jimmy Olsen.
That's fun.
So it was a cool little Jimmy to Jimmy moment at the bar there, where they kind of celebrated together after after Superman saves the day.
I feel like they should be drinking root beers together because they're Jimmy Olsen's.
I think he might even be wearing a bow tie, which he did a lot. Like that classic image of Jimmy Olsen, Jack Larson definitely embodied that, and it was a lot of fun to see him there. And then the one other one I'll shout out is Noelle Neal, who plays Gertrude Vanderworth, the aged woman who Lex swindles at the beginning. She played Lois on that show for the 2nd to 6th seasons. So these were fun little cameos. I know this was something my dad really liked because my dad remembered watching that show. And just fun little things to see when they brought in people like that for just little appearances. So it wasn't just Marlon Brando's archival footage. Got a couple of legacy Superman actors coming in there as well. So just just fun to see.
It's pretty cool, Andrew. I feel like we got to talk about this major plot point in this movie that, Superman was gone for 5 years. He comes back. Lois not only has a fiance, but a son who is roughly 5 years old. And if you're not suspecting it already, the movie confirms that it is, in fact, Superman's son. And it's unclear if, what's his name, Richard White knows the truth or not, but I feel like they try to throw you off by really emphasizing that, like, this kid physically is not impressive. Like, he's constantly using, like, his inhaler. He literally says, Richard says, he got an A in science and a D in gym. I'm like, man, that is a tough school. How do you get a D in gym?
Yeah, like, literally show up to gym, you get an A. Like, I don't understand. It's very weird.
But they really want us to know, like, I don't know, he can't be Superman's son, because, like, he's not that physical. And
yeah, they
later in the movie, he throws the
much.
piano, so I'm not sure, like, what the messaging is supposed to be there. But, yeah, it's Superman. It feels like it should be a big deal. Like, Superman has a kid on screen, but ultimately it kind of feels more like they're maybe setting something up for the next movie, because not too much comes of it. Although I will say that I think it's a very sweet and effective scene at the end when he gets to repeat his father's words to his son while his son is asleep. I think that works. I like that. And
I
cool
love that speech.
Yeah.
It's one of those moments in Superman the movie where I'm like, yeah, I know Brando was probably reading this off cards, but it still works. I like that a lot. Yeah, the implication very clearly is that this is Superman's son. I think there's no question. I don't think you can really avoid that in any way. And they obviously were definitely going to use that in a sequel. They said as much. It is odd. And I remember that also being an interesting choice, that, like, you're making a new Superman movie and you're introducing his superpowered child. Like, you're not even doing like a classic Superman versus his villain thing. We've got this child in the middle of it. And that was kind of a gag at the time, or like a meme where it's like, oh, add a kid to it. That definitely will get people more interested. Like, and that was a genuine thought process in many television shows of the 60s and the 70s too. But yeah, they definitely play coy with it, but yeah, I think they definitely go a little. Like, I think the idea definitely is that you catch on. You're kind of like, you're going a little heavy on this, and then when he's like, his mom's in danger, the powers come out, and there's a moment where he looks like he's gonna try to do something again, and then they subvert it by having his dad show up to save him, and then he really doesn't do anything the rest of the movie. Like, there's no more mention of it, so clearly it was going to be like a future plot point, but they obviously never got there. But interesting subplot. Like, you could have done the Lois Richard thing without the child. Like, you could have easily still done that. So bringing in the child and doing that was an interesting choice. I do want to shout out that Tristan Lake Lebeau.
I was thinking of that name. I was wondering the same thing. I was thinking LeBeau, kind of like, Remy LeBeau was the first thing I thought of. But
yeah, but just want to give him a shout out. He's still out there doing things. He was on The Young and the Restless from 2016 to 2020. He's just now 23, which is so weird to think about. That you think that he was 6, 7 when this movie was made.
Are you on his Wikipedia right now?
I am.
When I pulled up his Wikipedia, I was like, all right, what band is he in? He's definitely a musician now, right?
He is. He's a member of the Los Angeles-based alternative rock band Balto. I assume named after the Disney film of the same name. And it's also weird to think that Brandon Routh is 43. Like, Brandon Routh is not that much older than me. Because he was 26 when they made this. And so I was 19 when they made this, and 20 when it came out, or about to be 20 when it came out. So, and now the guy playing Superman is younger than me, and I'm...
Time keeps moving forward, Andrew.
All right, anyway, moving on. Cal Penn, also in this movie randomly. But Kumar himself from Harold and Kumar randomly shows up here too. One of Luthor's henchmen. Just a weird cameo. I love his weird little, where they're doing the experiment with the crystal to see how it works, where we get our great Parker Posey delivery, and they pan into this train setup, which is insane, by the way.
Extravagant. I love that room.
Yeah, it's It literally sounds like Lex was just like being a child while this woman died and he stole all her money. Like, he just
Yes.
bought all these weird things that he wanted. But there's this moment where like they're on the thing, and then he just like appears. Like he just like pops up with this pair of tweezers and this piece of crystal in it. And I was just like, why'd you do it that way? Why didn't you just walk in like a normal person? And then he fumbles and just drops it in. But yeah, he doesn't speak, I think, the whole film.
Yeah, I noticed
Like,
that. Like, it seems to be like a choice.
Yeah, like, and then he gets crushed at the end by a falling island pedestal thing.
As you do.
But yeah, just one of those weird things. And then we did mention it. Marlon Brando.
That model room, though, I want to say, whenever he drops that thing in, it starts rumbling, and there's all these close-up shots of like little figures falling over and getting run over by the train. And I swear, Andrew, those little screams. They put little screams in the sound effects as the people get run over. Like, they really went hard on that. It cracked me up.
They did. It was wild. And then that whole sequence is just, where we get the idea. You see what the tiny little sliver created, mass-wise, and so that's the genesis of Luthor's whole plan. Obviously, the crystals he stole from the Fortress of Solitude, which gives us our Marlon Brando cameo, where he activates the crystals, and they use some archival footage of Marlon Brando as Jor-El. They did have to talk to the Brando estate to get them to approve that, and they had access to apparently everything that was shot, which included unused footage, footage of him reciting poems, trailing off subject, and apparently swearing a whole lot. So there's another cut of this. There's another cut of this movie where Marlon Brando is enraged at Lex Luthor's presence and cusses him out very heavily, and I'm sad it doesn't exist. But yeah, that was another thing where it's like you're drawing those lines, and can you really be shocked that people are drawing those conclusions when you keep doing this? It's like it would be, Chris, follow me if you will. It would be like if you were making, say, a show about a set of characters, and you specifically cast an actor who played a previous version of that character, but didn't want people to think that it had anything to do with that. You follow what I'm saying here? Take, for example, like, follow me if you will. Take a character that no one cares about, like Quicksilver. Great example.
All right. Okay.
And say that if you were making a show.
You.
Okay, yes.
Okay, all right.
It would be like doing that, and then expecting people not to draw the comparison or have any kind of expectation related to that, which I would think seems to be a relatively naive way to look at that. But I didn't do it, so I guess I don't get to say. But it is, it's not much. It's literally like just one scene. It's not a whole lot. Because when Superman goes back to the fortress himself, like the crystals are all gone. He can't activate it. So it's interesting to me that these crystals are both information things, but also can like grow whole land masses. That's a thing we've never really seen before. Like obviously the fortress is created from a crystal, but the idea that all of the crystals can be used to do that is never really a thing until now. So that's definitely something that they were running with there. But yeah, I mean, the idea of just creating a new landmass that overtakes the United States is a little terrifying, to be fair. I
love whenever Luthor is explaining that he's got these maps that he keeps pulling down where the land mass is progressively bigger and bigger. And I love that it's physical maps that he pulls down, not like a computer screen with a clicker, like a PowerPoint presentation like you normally see. Like he dedicated an entire physical, tangible map to each stage of this years-long plan that he's hatching here.
Yeah,
very comic booky.
Yeah, and it's always that one where like, where did you have these made? Like, where did you, do this on such short notice? Like, where did these come from? Like, it's just such a supervillain thing to do that, and I do love that. Where like, there's I don't know if you've ever watched the Clerks cartoon.
I haven't.
It's wonderful. It's possibly one of the. It's annoying how much it holds up. I think it's just deeply funny. But there's a segment where they're talking to a guy who's kind of an evil. He's meant to be like an evil overlord type, but he's just kind of bumbling and a fool. But at one point, he like unveils what's supposed to be this model of his big plan, and it's just an empty table. And he's like, and then phase 5, and he pushes a button, and this empty table appears, and they're just like, it's just an empty table. And he's like, yeah, the dome model's not arriving till next week. And it's like, I just love that notion of like, it's like Luthor pulling these things down. It's like, there's nothing up there. It's like, yeah, they're coming soon. Staples has this 24-hour waiting period. It's ridiculous.
That's a very Kevin Smith joke too.
Yeah, it's very funny. But that cartoon, I think, genuinely holds up. But yeah, I just love that. Again, they're real maps. Somebody had to make those. Somebody had to either hand paint them or somebody had to print them out. I just love the notion of one of his henchmen like standing at Office Depot, just like, so are they ready, or like, do I need to come back in an hour? We kind of got a tough schedule, so it's very funny. But yeah, the bulk of this film, like I said, I mentioned that Superman and Luthor don't come face to face until almost 2 hours into this 2.5-hour movie. It is a very long movie, and they hold that back for a long time. I mean, to be fair, Lex doesn't interact with like any of the main players until like an hour and a half into this film, and like the scene where he runs into Lois always gets me because he's like completely unprepared. He's like in his bathrobe brushing his teeth, and he's like,
yeah,
Lois Lane?
There's this.
He's confused.
There's this, I think, unintentionally hilarious moment there where Lois and her son are walking there, and she looks over. She looks horrified. The camera pans from her face to this table full of wigs, and the music gets all menacing, like dun dun dun. It's like, it's a table full of wigs, but it's scary because that's how she realizes that it's Lex Luthor, I guess, because he's bald and he has a bunch of wigs. But like the reveal of the wigs was like the big thing that incites this menacing music, and then like you said, he walks out brushing his teeth. But yeah, that pan to the wigs really killed me.
Like I said, I don't know if it's intended. I mean, it's a supervillain over the top kind of thing. It works, but ultimately we get. But yeah, just Lex being complete. Also, Lex has this weird aesthetic he's doing in this movie where he's wearing suits, but they're tucked into like combat boots the whole time. It's so.
I did not pick up on this.
Very strange, but. And like I said, I noticed that Lois gets on that boat like an hour and 20 minutes into this movie, which means the climax of this movie is like the final hour. Like it's an hour from that moment to the end of the movie. So it's literally like setting the stage, and then we stay with this kind of sequence of events. But obviously Superman investigates this landmass as we get the big saving the people in the city thing, which is wonderful. It's fantastic. And Superman lands on this island and realizes that the ace in Lex's plan is that the island is made of kryptonite. So Superman almost gets himself killed until he is saved by Richard and Lois. And
Richard, man, he's a good dude.
Richard, he's rich, man. Rich. What can you say? But they save him, and he has this big moment where he flies up to the sun, recharges the batteries, gets himself back to neutral. And then I do love this sequence because it's one of those things that just shows how powerful Superman is, which there's always this big debate about how powerful Superman is. And I'll be honest with you guys, how powerful is any superhero? Like, superheroes are as powerful as the story dictates they need to be. Like, this idea of power levels with superheroes feels like so ridiculous. Or when people are like, Superman's not interesting because he's too powerful. It's like every superhero is too powerful. You know who's too powerful? Batman. Just saying. That dude's supposed to be a regular man. Yeah, right. I
always think that about Iron Man too. Like he's in a metal suit. That suit gets tossed around and beaten and plummets
where's
to
all
the ground.
Concussions, man?
Yeah, how is he fine in there? He's got something going on.
Iron Man versus
Captain
CTE.
America
That's his next problem. And then they've done stuff with Iron Man where he's got like the nano stuff, so it's like a suit that's like in his like it's all weird.
Don't defend him, Andrew.
I won't. Too powerful. But he's too powerful. But like they're all too powerful. Doctor Strange, way too powerful. Green Lantern, like they're all too powerful.
We got it.
But it always gets me when people say that specifically about Superman, that he's too powerful and that's why he's not interesting. Like you can't tell a good story with Superman because he's too powerful. And I'm like, well, that's because the stories aren't always about the powers. Like this Last Days of Lex Luthor story, fantastic first issue, doesn't really showcase his powers much at all because that's not what the story's about. And if you want stories where he fights people, there's plenty of those. General Zod, Brainiac, they all exist. But I love moments where we do get to see how powerful Superman is, and this is one of those because he's on this island getting kind of beat up because it's kryptonite embedded. So Lex like stabs him. The guys are all beating him up. This would have been the only time he threw a punch and wouldn't have like collapsed someone's spine. But he gets getting beat up this whole time. So he flies back down after he recharges from the sun, like burrows himself into the ground, and then just lifts this entire thing out of the ocean. And like I said,
heaviest thing he's lifted all movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's the heaviest thing. It's the finale. But they just see the sheer scale of it. That's what I love. I kind of forgot that, but like this thing is massive. It's an entire landmass, and Superman lifts it up out of the sky, out of the water, into the sky, throws it into space. And it's just like, man, this dude is powerful in a way that nobody can understand. There was a funny little video. There used to be it was a channel that did like it wasn't really superpowered beatdowns, but like they would do like a versus battle. And they would basically like objectively analyze both characters as deeply as they could and determine who they think would win. And they did Superman versus Goku from Dragon Ball Z. And they decided Superman would win. This made a lot of people very angry and is still considered to be a bad move. But the argument they made was that Goku's journey is all about overcoming the obstacles or his own personal limitation. That's mostly what his journey is about. Whereas Superman is as powerful as the story needs him to be. His journey is never about like overcoming a personal limitation. His journey is about different things. And they're like, so when you have a character who has limitations that he has to overcome versus a character who doesn't, the one who doesn't have limitations is the one who will eventually succeed because he doesn't have anything that needs to give, whereas the other character can. I thought it was actually a really genuinely like thoughtful way to look at that. And it still made the internet all mad because of course it did. But there's another sequence I like. It's at the end of the Justice League Unlimited cartoon where Brainiac and Darkseid kind of merge into a single person. And Superman kind of gives this speech where he's like, he talks about how he has to treat the world like it's made out of glass or it's made out of tissue paper. He's like, I have to be so careful at all times of all days just so that I don't accidentally hurt somebody. He's like, every day, all the time, nonstop. And he's like, until now. And he's like, because I'm pretty sure you can take it. And so it's Superman basically like, I'm going to fight you, Darkseid Brainiac, and I'm going to give you everything that I have because you can take it, and I don't have to hold back this time. And it's this really, really cool fight between Superman and Brainiac, or Superman and this like Brainiac Darkseid hybrid. And it's just another moment where you're just like, this man has a lot of powers, and the fact that he chooses to do good with them is, again, one of the hallmarks of the character that I love. And this moment, just being able to lift out a whole continent from the ocean, basically, and throw it into space. Almost killing himself in the process, but not quite, because he's Superman. He does get it out of the ocean, crashes back down to Earth. They try to, like, inject him, and I love, like, the needle.
The needle breaking, yeah, it's very cool.
They try to give him the defibrillator, and it, like, fries itself, because it can't actually shock through his skin. Just little things like that. And then ultimately, of course, he's fine because he's Superman. But it's just, I love the scale of this. I will say that. Like, just, he's this tiny little thing at the bottom of this massive continental landmass, and it's pretty cool.
I agree. Yeah, no notes. Great image, great visual. Only thing I want to highlight from this finale here is you have this moment where Lois and Richard and their son are trapped in the ship. The door is closed on them. It's filled with water. They're sinking. So Superman saves them. You see him like open up the door. He reaches down. He grabs onto Richard's hand. And he says, do you have them? Like asking if Richard has his family. He says, yeah. And then the camera pulls back. And you realize that Superman isn't just standing on the boat. He's actually lifted the entire ship out of the water. And he lets go of the ship and lets it fall down to the water while he's holding on to Richard and the family and, you know, keeping them in the air. And I love that little reveal that he's actually, he's not just standing on it. He's lifted this entire thing out. Those displays of power like that are, but yeah, it's pretty cool. You can't do that with every character, but it's pretty effective with Superman.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. And like I said, just, how effortless like that one in particular looks. Like he doesn't even look like he's straining, and you're like, this dude could really fight somebody if he had to. But not in this movie. But it's sorry, folks. But I do love those moments. I love the getting to see, especially when you can combine it with like Superman being Superman and doing Superman things, like the globe. Like that globe falls down and Superman flies down, grabs it like it's nothing, like absolutely nothing, and just sets it down on a car, which I thought was a weird choice. But like crushes a car to set it down, and he's like, "There we go. Just put this over here with the rest of the fire." But it's all cool stuff. I do appreciate that there is a relatively noble Superman at the heart of this film. Still some strange choices, like where he goes to Lois's house and is like watching her family. Some weird moments like that where I'm not really sure what you're going for. But
I'll counter that. I'll counter that with this, Andrew. We talked about a lot about how Richard's a good dude, and he is, but he has this one line. They're all in the office late. It's Richard, Lois, and Clark, and they're talking about Superman's powers and his X-ray vision. Lois says something about his X-ray vision, and Richard's like, "Huh, I'd have fun with that." Just offhand, kind of sleazy, but kind of, just whatever kind of joke. And like the end of the scene, Lois leaves to go up the elevator and go upstairs. And Clark is kind of just gazing at her, and he watches her walk through the doors, watches her get on the elevator, watches her grow up. He's just admiring her, longing at her from afar, and using his X-ray vision to, again, admire her. And the fact that we just had that joke about the sleazy thing you could use X-ray vision for, and then we see Clark using it to be kind of sentimental and sweet, and I guess there is a creep factor because they don't know they're being watched, blah, blah, blah. But I thought the juxtaposition...
just plow right past every single problematic part of this to the sentimentality.
Yes, I guess I'm trying to do that. But is it creepy for him to use his X-ray vision like without consent? Is that where we're getting at here?
I think it depends on what he's doing with it. Like on the plane, or the plane where he's like making sure there are no like there's no broken bones or any organ damage or anything, like something like that. Yeah, make sure I'm not dying. But
but just watching Lois, because at her house is kind of creepy, but in the building in Daily Planet, I don't know.
You just saw her. What are you still watching her for? Like, it's not like she's disappearing. She'll be back in like 5 minutes, man. Like, I don't know. I like I said, I'm mostly being pedantic when I say things like this, but it is always that's always the in the first Superman the movie, he like tells Lois what color underwear she's wearing.
Well, she asks him, right?
It's still
that's like a weird scene.
It's very weird. It's very to be fair.
Say that.
To be fair, it's very weird. Like in this one is like the thing where it's like it's in your right pocket, but like Clark saw her put it in that pocket. Like that's the thing there too. Like. So I don't know. The house one is what always trips me up, because like just her family at her house, and he's just like floating above, like watching and listening to them the whole time. And you're just like, you didn't need to do this. You could have just shown us this scene. Like you didn't need to like it's one of those things where it's like, oh well, Superman's listening to that conversation. It's like the movie could just show us that conversation. Like it doesn't need to.
We don't
like,
need the excuse of Superman listening in.
To listening to it for us to hear it. But yeah, some things like that are a little weird. I remember that being another punching bag for critics of the film. But at the heart of it, like I said, I like the scene where he's saving people in the city while the island is forming. Like, man, I love those sequences. They're so good.
Well, Andrew, Superman returns, and he did do that. Superman did return. He's returned a few more times since then. He will be returning again in the near future. Mr. Cornsweat, was that his name? Going back, we'll see how that.
Sweat.
Yeah, Cornsweat. See how that shakes out next week. Be sure to come back. We will be talking all about Dick Tracy. Another one that was on our list for a very long time. We were covering comic book movies. We just never quite got around to it, but I really want to talk about that movie. At the time of this recording, I still have not seen it. I own it. I've owned it for a while. I've always heard about it. I've seen scenes from it. I've heard a lot of talk about it. Seems like a heck of a thing, and I'm excited to dive into that. How about you, Andrew?
I am too. I haven't watched that in a long time. I'm actually not sure if I've ever watched the whole thing. I know there's a weird story with Warren Beatty's relationship with Dick Tracy, so I'm really looking forward to talking about that and diving into it, specifically how he keeps the rights. But yeah, I'm excited to dive into that movie and all the yeah, Warren Beatty is Dick Tracy. I mean, that's a thing that exists.
That's coming next week, but for now, it is time for our question of the week. If you want to ask us a question for a future episode, you can. Just hop into our Discord. There's a link right there in the show notes. What are you waiting for? Come on and join us. And this week, our question comes from Oculus Neko, who asks, do stage names matter? Would Natalie Portman still be as famous if she were Nita Lee Herschlag? Or Blake Lively if she were Blake Brown? I assume these are these actresses' real names. I have not looked it up. Chris Evans has a pretty basic name, but still made it big. Hang on. What's so basic about Chris Evans now?
Easy now.
Easy.
Easy.
So is a cool / unique name actually necessary, or does an actor's work always end up trumping their name? This is interesting. All right, so a few that come to mind. I'm trying to think of people that I know have changed their name. Like Martin Sheen. He changed his name to be, I believe, like less quote unquote ethnic to help get him roles, which is one of those things that's kind of like a sad reality, I guess, for the times. So I'm sure he would say that benefited him. But you look at his sons, one Estevez, one Sheen, they both made it big. It wasn't an issue there. Who else has changed their name? Recently, Andrew, I was thinking about Michael B. Jordan, as you do. And I was like, it's so interesting that he is always billed as Michael B. Jordan. Michael B. Jordan. There's always that initial. Is it a contract? You've got to use my middle initial. And then it dawned on me, if it weren't for that middle initial, he would just be Michael Jordan, which would probably be an issue. So I suddenly understood why it was important to be billed as Michael B. Jordan. So yeah, I think it names. I would say it matters. I can't imagine it's like a make or break you kind of thing. I can't imagine there's an actor out there like, if only I had a different name, I would have, made it to the big time. But I gotta imagine it can help.
I think it used to be a much bigger deal than it is now. Like Cary Grant's name is Archibald Leach. I don't know if you establish yourself as the preeminent leading man in all of Hollywood with the name Archibald Leach.
That sounds like there was a contest to come up with like the worst actor name, and that was the best submission.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Like Archibald Leach sounds like a supervillain. Like he sounds like Leech Man, and it's Archibald Leach was born a regular man until an accident at his work with a bunch of leeches. John Wayne's name is Marion Robert Morrison, and so things like that. I think the changes were definitely in the era of which those men were active. I think a name did matter. Like John Wayne wanted a tough sounding name. He didn't want Marion to be his name. Which I'm not agreeing that him feeling he needed to change his name was a good thing. It's not. My grandfather's name was Marion, and it's a good name. And but I think in that time, with the way everything was, I think it definitely mattered more then, where you needed a good stage name, and especially leading men really needed John Wayne was the preeminent tough guy on television or in movies. He needed a tough sounding name, and John Wayne sounds pretty normal by today's standards, but he's John Wayne. And Cary Grant flows off the tongue. Archibald Leach, not so much. So I think back then,
I always thought Marilyn Monroe was an interesting one because, it's a nice name, but I feel like Norma Jean is a nice name, and I feel like that could have, it doesn't have the alliteration, I guess, but I feel like that one was that one always felt lateral to me.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a story that somebody in our Discord can tell us. I guess maybe Norma Jean. I guess it was Norma Jean Mortensen, but you could have just gone by Norma Jean. But I'm not gonna. Marilyn Monroe was chewed up and spit out by the system, and it's really awful what happened to her. So I'm not gonna, not gonna question any of her decisions. I think she obviously got super famous off that name. I think nowadays it matters far less. I mean, you got guys like Benedict Cumberbatch. Like that sounds like a fake name. That sounds like another like Archibald Leach, Benedict Cumberbatch. Those sound like the same name generator came up with those. So I think now we live in a time where it's far more like, hey, as long as the performance is there and as long as the stuff is good, I don't think people pay attention nearly as much. I mean, David Corenswet is going to be Superman. Like it's like true. It's I think it's something that now matters much less, but I think there was a time where it mattered more. Especially now with like the age of the internet age, the social media age, people are attaching much more to people's personalities, their kind of general performances. The names kind of, I feel, are a lot less important.
I do gotta wonder if the career of our boy Johan Griffith would have been different if he took on a different name or changed the spelling to make it more palatable to people who have no idea how to pronounce that name when they see it on a poster. And I did see back when I was like looking up how to pronounce his name, he was kind of asked about that, and he was like, "No, I'm proud of my name. It's oh man, Welsh, I believe." Yeah. And he wanted to stick with, and I admire that he stuck with like the correct spelling and pronunciation and
what was that?
Pronunciation of his name. I don't know what it was. That's me trying to say pronunciation and ironically having trouble with it. But I admire that. I'm not saying he should have changed his name, but you just got to wonder how much does it factor in. But I would agree that in general, as we've gone on, it seems to matter less.
You have a lot of people as well where they made a change due to the fact that like the other name was already taken. Like Michael Keaton is not Michael Keaton's name. Michael Keaton's name is Michael Douglas. And it turns out
interesting.
There's already somebody that has that name. And so like in SAG rules, he couldn't have the same name. Like the same like credited name as another actor. So he had to come up with something else. I do not know the genesis of where Keaton comes from. But yeah, his name is Michael Douglas. And so he couldn't go by that because there's already one of those.
Interesting.
So the story of why Steve Austin goes by Steve Austin is because there was already a wrestler named Steve Williams. A pretty underrated wrestler at that, folks. Dr. Death Steve Williams' run in Japan is great. But that's why, that's obviously not an actor thing, but it was a similar idea of like, well, there's already a wrestler, pretty prominent, called Steve Williams. I can't just also be that, so I have to be.
What's funny about that though is Steve Austin is also a well-known name as from the $6 Million Man, yeah. But
so I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know if he's ever explained why on that one, but I guess that's why they called him Bionic Redneck.
God, that's a horrible name. Austin came from where he was from, and it was someone recommended that. It's like, well, what city are you from? Austin. Okay, great. You're Steve Austin. I can't remember who he credits someone with that, but I don't remember. I have to dive back into my Steve Austin lore. But yeah, I don't know, man. Names are weird. Names are weird. I will. That's my takeaway.
But like I said, my through line will basically be like, I do believe there was a time where it did matter. Specifically in regards to leading men, at least, where they felt like they had to create a certain image of themselves. I think now people care far less.
Well, now I just want to know who all has a stage name out there that I didn't know about. I had no idea Michael Keaton wasn't Michael Keaton. So if you have more examples of this, please let me know who it is. Who has a surprising birth name of a well-known celebrity or actor. Hop into our Discord and please let me know. Keep the conversation going. And until next week, when we're talking about Dick Tracy, just remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. You can follow him on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy. And check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. It is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. All right, let's count it up. 1,
2,
3,
4,
5.
6.
Okay, guess I'm doing that. Here we go.
Jesus Christ, man.
All right, that's late. I'm old.
That is true.
There's a video game called Street Fighter.
Someone's at the front door.
There's a video game called Street Fighter X Tekken